They say love given freely should never expect repayment, but they don't tell you how much it aches when it's not even acknowledged. I remember the first time I held her, my niece, Alyssa, just a wrinkled bundle of need and hope. My sister had called me from the hospital in tears, abandoned by the man who swore he'd be there for the birth. "I can't do this alone," she had sobbed. She didn't have to. I moved into her home that same week. I didn't plan to stay long, just until she found her rhythm. But life rarely unfolds according to plan, especially in our family. 3 years. That's how long I gave myself to her and that house. When my sister died unexpectedly in a car accident, everything shifted. I became Alyssa's guardian, her stability. I was 43 then, with no children of my own. Not because I didn't want them, life just kept giving me people to care for who weren't mine, as if I was meant to be the backstage hand rather than the one in the spotlight. In those 3 years, I worked double shifts at the community clinic to pay the bills, cooked every meal, scrubbed every tile, and sat through every school conference and tearful heartbreak like a mother should. I paid the property taxes when the notice arrived in red. I bought groceries when the fridge echoed. I kept the heat on, even when it meant skipping my own dental work. So imagine my silence, the still, searing kind, when she looked at me, 3 days after her 18th birthday, standing taller now, with her mother's eyes but none of her softness, and said, "Auntie, you're just a guest here now. We need space." I didn't cry. I didn't shout. Instead, I looked around the room I'd painted, the furniture I'd salvaged, the framed pictures I'd straightened every morning like prayer beads. My name wasn't on the deed, no. My name wasn't on much. That was by design. I had spent so long making sure she had everything that I forgot to leave something for myself. I nodded slowly. "Of course, dear," I said, the smile on my face not quite reaching my eyes. Then I walked to the garden, where my phone waited quietly on the porch table, and I made a single call. The voice on the other end answered almost instantly. "Yes, it's me," I said calmly. "I'm ready now. The house is yours." Because here's what she didn't know: the deed may not bear my name, but the mortgage did. Her mother had refinanced it 2 months before her death to keep the family afloat. I had continued the payments in secret, never missing a month, never thinking to use it as leverage. Until now. They wanted space. And space they would get. The next morning came heavy with silence. I packed slowly, not in haste, but in ceremony. Each item folded and tucked away held a story, a memory I knew she wouldn't remember, wouldn't care to. The photo albums, the handmade birthday cards, even the burnt orange scarf I wore to every one of her school performances. She would not ask for them. She would not miss them. But I took them anyway, not out of spite, but because someone should remember the love that built that house. She didn't come downstairs. I heard laughter from her room, a new voice, a boy's, maybe the one who whispered ambitions of independence into her ear. That was fine. Youth is bold when it believes it's the author of its own destiny. I once believed that too. By noon, the house was empty of me. I stood on the porch, looked at the welcome mat I'd bought years ago, home is who you share it with, and gave a wry smile. It had once felt true. I turned the key in the door one last time and left it on the small ceramic dish by the side table. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was locking myself out of a home I'd spent a decade trying to keep whole. But not without consequence. That afternoon, I drove to the county courthouse. There, I filed the paperwork, a lien against the property for the remaining mortgage balance, nearly $80,000. The house might bear her name, but the debt bore mine, and I was done letting my sacrifices become her entitlement. By law, she'd be served within 7 business days. But I knew the timing. The real reckoning would come before that. The Parker family reunion. Oh, how they would gather, cousins in designer coats, uncles boasting about IPOs, aunts discussing Europe, and private schools over shrimp cocktail. It was tradition, a feast of facades. And this year, for the first time, the reunion would be hosted not in some sterile hotel ballroom, but at the home I had just vacated. Alyssa's idea, no doubt. To flaunt her newfound independence. To display the home like a trophy, without realizing it was made of borrowed dreams and unpaid dues. But the guest list included someone she hadn't accounted for. Me. Not as the quiet aunt in the corner, serving cheese plates and disappearing before dessert. No. This year, I would arrive not in service, but in strength. Not to beg for acknowledgement, but to reclaim my story. Because family may forget the hands that built the table, but they always remember when the table is flipped. The days that followed were oddly serene, as if the universe had exhaled after holding its breath through years of my silence. I returned to the small rental on Maple Hill where I had once imagined retiring, a place I'd kept in my name, just in case. The walls were bare, the windows streaked with sunlight that didn't apologize for its angles. It wasn't much, but it was mine. My phone stayed quiet, except for the bank's confirmation of the lien filing. Legally binding, irrefutable, and entirely unexpected by her and by them. I spent that week not in grief, but in preparation. I dug through boxes I hadn't opened in years, financial records, handwritten notes from her mother, and the original refinance agreement signed in a mix of hope and desperation. Proof of my sacrifices. I wasn't going to present it, not unless I was forced. This wasn't about revenge. It was about record-keeping. And reckoning. The reunion was set for Saturday. Saturday, the 22nd, ironic really. Her mother had loved numerology. She believed twos carried the energy of duality, endings and beginnings, heartbreak and healing. Saturday dawned humid and heavy. I chose my outfit with care, not flashy, not loud. Simple black trousers, a navy blouse, my hair pulled back in a low chignon. I wore no jewelry save for a delicate silver bracelet my sister had given me on the day Alyssa was born. "You're her second mother now," she had said, eyes full of gratitude. That bracelet I kept. As I approached the house, I noticed the garden first. Overgrown, unkempt. The hydrangeas had wilted into a tangle of blue ghosts. I had planted those. With my bare hands, the first spring after her mother's passing. Alyssa had helped me then, her little fingers digging into the soil, asking if the flowers would bloom like her mom's perfume. "Only if we care for them," I'd answered. No one had. The driveway was full, BMWs, Autos, one Tesla with a vanity plate that read Universal. I chuckled. The Parker clan had arrived in full theater. Inside, the air hummed with forced pleasantries and the clink of wine glasses. Laughter echoed like a rehearsed laugh track. And in the center of it all stood Alyssa, radiant in her ignorance. She wore white, a shade that begged for forgiveness without knowing the weight of its plea. When she saw me, her smile faltered. "Auntie," she said, approaching slowly. "I didn't expect to see me?" I finished gently. "I know." A hush followed us as I stepped further in. Conversations dipped into whispers. A few faces stiffened, not out of shame, but calculation. They were sensing a shift in the script. I offered my hostess gift, a box of artisan teas from the same shop her mother and I used to visit on Sundays. She took it with a trembling thank you, eyes darting to the kitchen. "You've redecorated," I said, surveying the space. "Just a few updates," she replied. "I see. And yet the foundation's still mine." She blinked. A pause. "Then, I don't know what that means." "You will," I said, calm as stone. Because in the envelope I'd just slid under her stack of party favors was a copy of the lien notice. They were about to learn that you cannot erase the hands that built your kingdom, not without consequence. The party continued, or tried to. Music played from hidden speakers, ambient and forgettable. The wine flowed as it always did at Parker gatherings, generous, but not warm. Conversation floated on the surface like lily pads, delicate and detached. But beneath it all, the current shifted. I could feel it. Aunt Marilyn spotted me by the fireplace and stiffened as though she'd tasted vinegar. She wore pearls and that same smug smirk she'd perfected in the 80s, the matriarch in mourning for her relevance. "Well," she said, voice high and clipped, "I must say, Olivia, you've aged, subtly." I smiled. Time has a way of softening sharp things, doesn't it? Her eyes narrowed. "Didn't expect to see you here." "I imagine you didn't." She gestured toward the center of the room where Alyssa was laughing too loudly with her cousin Stefan, the one who once told me I'd peaked in high school because I knew how to bake a soufflé. "She's quite the hostess, don't you think?" Hosting is easy when someone else built the home, I said, my tone still gentle. Still devastating. Her expression tightened, but she held her tongue. Good. I wasn't here to bicker. I was here to haunt. The envelope I delivered was making its way across the gathering now, hand to hand, eyes widening. I watched from a quiet corner as the realization took hold, first in Alyssa's face as she read the legal language she couldn't yet understand, then in the tightly clenched jaw of Uncle Philip, who fancied himself a real estate guru. I saw him flip through the pages, then whisper harshly into his wife's ear. Panic, like perfume, is invisible but unmistakable. Still, I didn't gloat. My wine remained untouched. My hands folded neatly in my lap. Let them speculate. Let them remember. The girl they dismissed, the woman they disregarded, had returned not with vengeance, but with truth. And then she came. Rebecca. The cousin who once called me a waste of a good education, who refused to sit next to me at our last Thanksgiving because I was wearing thrifted boots. She approached now with the grace of someone who'd just realized her social currency was crashing. Olivia, she said, with a practiced half-smile, we've missed you. No, you haven't, I replied. But I appreciate the effort. She flushed. This thing with Alyssa, surely we can talk. Of course, I said, rising slowly. Let's. We stepped into the sunroom, the same room I once painted lavender because Alyssa said it made her feel like she was inside a cloud. The paint had been covered now, replaced by sterile beige. But the bones were still mine. She didn't know, Rebecca began. I know. And she's young. She's 18. Yes, but... She is not the villain, I said, cutting gently. She is the product. Of you. Of this family. Rebecca looked away. I gave her everything. Quietly. Without needing credit. I did the same for all of you in one way or another. Babysat your children. Cooked your meals. Paid your silent debts. Her lips parted, but I didn't let her speak. You think I'm angry. But I'm not. I'm just done pretending that my value lies in being invisible. We stood in silence, the weight of history pressing on us like humidity before a storm. Then I turned toward the door. I'll let myself out. Olivia, wait. What happens now? I paused, hand on the doorknob. Now? The house stays hers for a while. But she'll have to make choices. Real ones. Like I did. Like you never had to. And I left them there in the silence of consequence. I drove home in the twilight, the road a blur of streetlights and memory. My hands stayed steady on the wheel, but inside me something uncurled, something that had been knotted tight for years. It wasn't anger. That would have been too easy. It was clarity. And beneath that, a quiet grief for all I had given to a house that had never once called me home. When I arrived at the small apartment, my phone buzzed with messages I didn't check. I knew what they would say. Pleas for explanations masked as concern. Thinly veiled accusations from those who never noticed the cost of their comforts. Instead, I lit a single candle, cinnamon and cedar, my sister's favorite scent. I let the flame burn until the room softened. Then I opened my old ledger, not the digital one, not the Excel spreadsheet I used for taxes, but the blue leather-bound notebook I had kept hidden in the back of my closet. The one that held every dollar I'd spent on them. Every grocery run. Every school supply. Every late fee I covered without a word. Every holiday meal where I brought food in silence. It was all there, written in tidy rows, more precise than any bank statement. $1,482. 17 first year of guardianship expenses. $300 ballet lessons she begged for and promptly quit. $2,750 furnace repair that winter the pipes froze. $5,000 Alyssa's braces. I stopped tallying at $47,820. It wasn't about the money. Not really. It was about the arithmetic of love. How many sacrifices does it take to earn a place at your own table? How many sleepless nights equal one moment of recognition? The next morning, I received a call from the Parker family's lawyer. Predictable. She spoke in clipped tones about confusion regarding property entitlements, about amicable resolution. I listened politely, then interrupted her. Tell them, I said, that I don't want the house. A pause. You don't. I want it sold. I want the mortgage cleared. I'll accept repayment for my equity. Nothing more. Another pause, longer this time. That could be arranged. I smiled. I know. And, just like that, the tide shifted again. Because what they feared more than confrontation was exposure. What they valued more than relationships was reputation. I was giving them an out. But I was also drawing a line. That afternoon, I drove to the lake. Not to escape, but to remember. My sister and I used to walk its edge every spring, toes skimming the thawed shoreline, laughter caught in our scarves. She had been my twin in spirit, sharp, soft, brave, and we had made promises beneath those birch trees. That if anything ever happened, we would take care of each other's girls. I had done that. I had kept my word. But now it was time to keep one to myself. I pulled out the small glass jar from my coat pocket. Inside were the ashes of the bracelet, the one she had given me, now reduced to memory. I scattered them across the water, whispering a farewell not to her, but to the woman I had been while trying to keep her memory alive through sacrifice. The lake shimmered. The wind shifted. And for the first time in years, I felt something like peace. It took only 5 days for the silence to become noise. Not from within, but from them, the family who had so long benefited from my invisibility, now floundering in the sudden void of my quiet labor. Alyssa called. Twice. I didn't answer. Her voice, trembling in the voicemails, held none of the haughtiness from our last encounter. Auntie, I didn't know. Please, can we talk? I didn't delete them. But I didn't listen to them again either. Instead, I climbed into the attic of the rental. The wooden ladder groaned under my weight, as if protesting the metaphor. It had been years since I'd visited this space. Dust clung to everything like memory refusing to be forgotten. I found the box on the far wall, labeled in my sister's handwriting, for Olivia, when she's ready. My hands shook as I lifted the lid. Inside were old photographs, sealed letters, and a small envelope marked in faded ink. Don't open unless she breaks your heart. I sat back, the weight of the moment pressing into my chest like a slow ache. I recognized the photos, snapshots from our youth. The two of us as children at the beach, smeared in sunscreen and joy. Alyssa's baby pictures, some I had never seen before. And then, nestled between them, a folded piece of notepaper I knew instantly. My sister's journal. I opened it carefully, like it might crumble in my fingers. On the first page, her handwriting danced, slanted, messy, alive. If you're reading this, Liv, then I failed. I didn't teach her enough. I didn't raise her long enough. And you, my dear sister, took on more than I had any right to ask of you. The words blurred. I blinked back tears. You always loved her. I saw it in the way you looked at her when she cried, even before I did. You weren't her aunt. You were her lighthouse. The journal went on page after page of love, regret, gratitude. And buried deep in the back, a letter addressed to Alyssa, never sent. It read like a roadmap to heartbreak. If I'm not there anymore, listen to your Aunt Olivia. Trust her. She won't always say what you want to hear, but she'll never stop loving you. Don't push her away. Not like I did. I sat in the attic until the light outside softened into gold. And for the first time since that awful day she told me to leave, I allowed myself to feel something besides betrayal. Because she didn't know. She didn't know. She had been a child. Hurt, confused, full of the bravado of someone trying to prove she didn't need saving. And I had let her believe the lie because it hurt less than admitting how deeply it wounded me. Later that evening, I sat down with pen and paper. No texts. No emails. This deserved weight. Ink. Dear Alyssa, I began. You once asked me to leave your home, not realizing I had never truly made it mine. I don't blame you. How could you have known what wasn't yours to carry? I didn't write to accuse her. I wrote to return her mother's voice to her. And in doing so, perhaps return a piece of myself. I mailed it without ceremony. No registered delivery, no insurance, no tracking. Just a plain white envelope addressed in my handwriting, dropped into the same blue mailbox where I'd once sent off college applications and Christmas cards no one replied to. It felt like exhaling after holding my breath for years. 3 days passed. Then, on the 4th morning, my phone buzzed with a text. From Alyssa, I read it. No punctuation. No embellishment. Just those 3 words. I stared at the screen for a long time. My first instinct was to respond. But I waited. I had given her a map, not a destination. What she did next would show whether she wanted to find her way back, not to the house, but to me. That evening, I lit a candle again. Cedar and cinnamon. It was becoming a ritual, not for mourning, but for memory. The next day, a knock came at the door. I didn't expect it. Didn't want it, if I'm honest. But when I opened the door, there she stood. Alyssa. No makeup. No entourage. Just a girl, holding the same letter I had sent, creased and damp at the corners like it had been read too many times and wept over. I didn't know, she whispered. I said nothing. I wanted to hear more. I thought. Her voice cracked. I thought I built all of this. That it was mine. I nodded. You did build something. But not alone. She looked down. I was awful to you. Yes, I said. But that's not what matters right now. She looked up, startled. It's not. No. What matters is if you want to know the story you never heard, the one that built the floor beneath your feet. She stepped inside. We didn't hug. We didn't cry. We sat at the kitchen table, the same kind I'd cleaned 1,000 times in another life, and I poured us tea. Just like her mother used to do on long nights when the world was too loud. And I told her. Not just about the mortgage and the sacrifice. That would come later. No, I started with stories of her mother in college, wild and brilliant, the way she used to dance in the rain. Of Alyssa as a baby, colicky and fierce, only calmed by the sound of my humming. Of the birthday where she cried because the balloons popped too fast, and I ran to the store in the pouring rain to get more, returning soaked but victorious. I don't remember any of that, she said quietly. You weren't meant to, I replied. But it's in you nonetheless. She nodded, lips trembling. I didn't know how to say I was scared. You weren't supposed to, I said. You were supposed to feel safe. We sat in silence for a long time. When she left, she didn't ask for forgiveness. And I didn't offer it, not like a gift to be accepted. Instead, I gave her something greater, the invitation to rebuild. From truth. From humility. From love. The next day, she called the lawyer herself. I want to put her name on the deed, she told him. But I declined. No, I said gently. What I want is a clean slate. Sell the house. Pay off the mortgage. Use what's left to start your real life. Not the one we build out of fear and survival. The one you get to choose. She cried then. Not because I refused her offer, but because she finally understood what I'd given. Freedom. Not for me. For her. The house sold quickly. It wasn't just the market, though the city was ripe with buyers hunting for charm and location. No, it was the bones of the place. It carried a warmth that only comes from years of tending. That house had been more than walls and floors. It had held grief, laughter, growing pains, and sacrifice. It had held us. The agent called me to confirm the final offer. Well above asking, she said. The buyers loved the character. I smiled. If only they knew. The day Alyssa signed the final documents, she texted me a picture of the empty living room. The caption was just one word, echoes. I stared at it for a long while. The bare floor where her first steps landed. The corner where I'd once curled up with her after nightmares. The place where I stood the night she told me to leave. All of it, memory now. She moved into a modest apartment closer to her university. I helped her look at a few, but let her make the final choice. This time, she asked my opinion but didn't depend on it. That was the shift. That was growth. I visited once, weeks after her move. The apartment was sparse, but hers. The walls were bare except for one frame, a photo I didn't expect to see. It was of the 3 of us, her mother, and me at the lake. Alyssa was maybe 6, missing a front tooth and grinning like she owned the sky. Her mother had her arm around both of us, and I was laughing, head tilted, eyes closed. I found it in a drawer, she said softly. I don't remember that day. But I want to. You will, I told her. In pieces. Not all at once. We sat together on her worn couch, sharing silence like old friends. Then she did something she hadn't done in years. She laid her head on my shoulder. No words. Just wait. just presence. And in that moment, I realized something profound. I had spent years trying to mother a child who thought she didn't need one. I had poured myself into a role that wasn't mine by blood, but entirely mine by love. And now, without fanfare or force, she was offering it back. Not the role, but the relationship. On her own terms. On ours. Weeks turned into months. We settled into a rhythm. She called, not for help, but to share. I visited sometimes, not to fix, but to witness. And slowly, carefully, we began to fill the cracks with something sturdier than obligation. Truth. She began asking about her mother more. The real stories. Not the sugar-coated ones. I told her about the day we skipped class in college to sit in a cemetery and write poetry about ghosts we hadn't met yet. About the time she tried to bake a cake, and we both ended up covered in flour, laughing so hard we collapsed in the kitchen. About how scared she was when she found out she was pregnant, and how sure she was that Alyssa would be her salvation. She was right, Alyssa whispered one evening. She was hopeful, I corrected. You don't owe her salvation. Just remembrance. And so we remembered. Together. There were still hard days. Days when old wounds stung. When words returned, echoing from old arguments. But we faced them like weather, something to acknowledge, not hide from. That winter, Alyssa invited me to a small gathering at her place. Her first real holiday as host. She decorated with thrifted finds and paper garlands she made herself. She served soup and bread, simple but warm. And just before dinner, she lifted her glass. To chosen family, she said. And to the ones who stayed, even when they weren't thanked. She looked at me. Her voice didn't crack. But her eyes did. And I raised my glass in return. To love that doesn't need permission. Snow had fallen the night before, a soft dusting that blanketed the city in hush and forgiveness. The kind of morning that makes you believe the world can begin again if you just step outside and listen. I walked to the bakery down the street from Alyssa's apartment. It had become our unspoken meeting spot, the halfway place between my silence and her apologies. They served a cinnamon brioche that reminded me of the kind we used to make in the old kitchen when Alyssa was small enough to sit on the counter, her legs swinging and powdered sugar smudged on her cheeks. She arrived just as I finished my coffee, cheeks pink from the cold, scarf loosely knotted. Sorry I'm late, she said, brushing snow from her coat. I stopped to help a neighbor dig out her car. I smiled. Your mother would have liked that. She always said a woman's strength was in the quiet things, she replied, sitting down. I didn't understand what that meant until recently. Neither did I admitted. Not until it became my only language. She looked down at her hands, then back up at me. Do you ever regret it? Staying. Raising me? The question hit like a stone dropped into still water, slow to break the surface, but rippling for miles underneath. Sometimes, I said honestly. Not the love. Never that. But the cost? Yes. There were days I mourned the life I didn't get to live. The dreams I folded away so you could unfold yours. Tears welled in her eyes. But I reached across the table before they fell, placing my hand gently over hers. But I chose you, I said. Every day. Even when I wasn't chosen back. That night, she came to my place for the first time since I'd moved. It was smaller, simpler, a one-bedroom walk-up with crooked floorboards and a draft that snuck through the windows no matter how tightly I sealed them. But it was mine. She brought soup this time. I provided the wine. We lit candles and talked about everything but the past. Instead, we spoke of her classes, the professor who believed in her writing, the part-time job at the campus bookstore that made her feel like she was part of something. And then, near the end of the night, she handed me a thin, wrapped package. Just because, she said, shrugging. I opened it slowly, old habits die hard. Inside was a framed page of a poem. Handwritten. Hers. The title, Inheritance. You gave me nothing branded. No diamonds, no deeds, no gold. But you handed me the mirror, in which I found my soul. I didn't cry. Not that night. But later, when the dishes were done and the house had gone still, I read it again. And this time, the tears came. Not for what I lost, but for what I had reclaimed. She was becoming the woman I had hoped to protect all along, not polished, not perfect, but real. Rooted, kind, and aware. The cycle had broken. Not through confrontation, but through recognition. Through choosing to love without erasing the cost. Spring came early that year, soft and uncertain. The kind of spring that doesn't announce itself with blossoms or fanfare, but tiptoes in quietly, asking permission to stay. I found myself breathing deeper, walking slower, letting the light in through windows I had kept shuttered for too long. Alyssa visited more often now, not out of obligation, but in the gentle rhythm of relationship. She no longer asked me to teach her how to cook. She just showed up with groceries and said, "We're trying something new." She no longer apologized for the past every time we spoke. She let the present carry her contrition instead. One afternoon, while helping me reorganize the bookshelves, she found the blue ledger. The one with every expense I had recorded. I had tucked it into a storage box, thinking I'd eventually throw it away. But part of me couldn't. It wasn't about the money, it was the proof. The testimony that I had been there, even when I was unseen. She ran her fingers along the spine. "Is this what you meant, about what you gave?" I looked at her. Yes. And no. "Can I read it?" I hesitated, then nodded. She sat in the armchair by the window, the sun catching her hair the same way it used to catch her mother's. She read in silence for nearly an hour, flipping through pages thick with the weight of forgotten groceries, doctor copays, school field trip fees, emergency plumber bills, Christmas gifts, ballet shoes, gas money, midnight ice cream runs during heartbreak. When she finally looked up, her face was pale. "I had no idea," she whispered. "You weren't supposed to." She stood and walked over to me, holding the book like it was something sacred. "Can I keep this?" "Why?" "Because I need to know where I come from." I smiled. "Then write your own story in the back." So she did. That night, while I cooked dinner, she sat at the table and filled the remaining pages. Not with numbers, but with memories. Tiny entries of love and acknowledgement. March 8th, the night we made grilled cheese and talked about Mom's laugh. I want to remember that forever. March 22nd, you cried during the movie. I didn't say anything, but I noticed. I won't forget again. April 1st, you called me kiddo without thinking. It was the first time it felt right again. I read them later, long after she had gone home. Each one felt like a stitch, not sealing the wound, but honoring the scar. A week later, she brought me a gift. It wasn't big. Just a wooden box, hand-painted in soft blues and whites. Inside was a new ledger. Blank. "For your life now," she said. "Not the one you gave up. The one you're still building." And I understood. I had spent so long documenting sacrifice that I had forgotten how to record joy. So I opened the new ledger. And on the first page, in careful script, I wrote, "April 10th, Alyssa remembered the tea I liked. Brought it without asking. Sat with me for 2 hours. We didn't talk about the past. We just lived." The new book wasn't about tallying anymore. It was about testifying not to pain, but to presence. To the slow, quiet unfolding of healing. Late April brought an unexpected knock at my door. I wasn't expecting anyone. Alyssa had class. The neighbors were polite but distant, the kind who waved from across the hall but never visited. Still, the knock was neither urgent nor casual. It was the kind of knock that carried memory. I opened the door and there stood Aunt Marilyn. She hadn't changed much. Hair meticulously styled into something that defied age, coat tailored to perfection, eyes like polished glass, sharp, reflective, unforgiving. "Olivia," she said, lips pursed in a neutral line. "May I come in?" I stepped aside, unsure why I said yes. She walked in slowly, eyeing the space. I could feel the silent assessment, the way she used to inspect our family Christmas trees, always measuring, never marveling. "Tea?" I asked, out of habit. "Please," she replied, sitting with the posture of a judge preparing for sentencing. In the kitchen, I tried to steady my hands. This was not a woman who came bearing good intentions. If Aunt Marilyn showed up, there was purpose behind it. We sat opposite each other at the small dining table. She folded her hands neatly. "I wanted to see you in person. Before things get too far." I tilted my head. Too far. The family, she said carefully, is concerned. About? This narrative. The one Alyssa is spinning. About sacrifice. About debt. About your role in things. I let out a soft laugh. Is that what it's called now? A narrative. Don't be coy, Olivia, she snapped, the ice finally cracking. You've created quite a scene. Embarrassing, really. I sipped my tea. Funny. You weren't embarrassed when I was covering everyone's disasters. You weren't embarrassed when I was serving drinks at reunions, setting tables no one asked me to sit at. That was your choice, she said. No one asked you to do that. That's the point, I said quietly. No one asked. No one even saw. A pause. Then, softer than I expected, you've made your point. Why drag it out? I met her gaze. Because the silence wasn't harmless. It cost me years. Dreams. Parts of myself I'm only now recovering. You don't get to call my healing a scene. She looked away, jaw tight. I don't want an apology, I said. Not from you. Not from anyone. But I won't shrink back into the corner just because it's more convenient for you. She stood, adjusting her coat. Well, I suppose we all grieve in different ways. Yes, I said. Some of us by acknowledging the truth. Others by pretending nothing ever happened. At the door, she paused. Alyssa is still young. Don't poison her against the family. I opened the door for her. She's not a child anymore. She sees what she sees. And she's choosing truth. She stepped into the hallway, her expression unreadable. You've changed, Olivia. No, I said, smiling sadly. I've just stopped hiding. When the door closed behind her, I stood in the quiet. I didn't shake. I didn't cry. I just returned to my tea, still warm. And for the first time in decades, I felt exactly where I was supposed to be, not defending my life, but living it.